Imagine boarding a flight meant to be your moment of joy, only to find yourself the target of an invisible prejudice. 74-year-old Alma Greene settles into her first-class seat, dreaming of blooming Swiss gardens and a world that respects her life's work. But when a fellow passenger demands her seat, a quiet request spirals into a clash of dignity versus entitlement. Who was the elderly woman with the calm yet unshakable resolve? Why would an airline crew, trained to serve, insist she move? And what happens when that woman's son happens to be one of the most powerful CEOs on the planet? As you step into this story, you will confront the unspoken biases that lurk behind polite smiles. You will wonder how far one person can push back before the world takes notice. Prepare to witness a single phone call unleash a corporate storm that changes lives and forces an entire industry to reckon with its soul. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe now so you don't miss a single moment of Alma's unforgettable stand for justice. The morning air in Savannah carried the faint scent of magnolia and memory. Alma Greene stood by her front porch, watering the single row of marigolds that lined her modest walkway. Her hands moved with the ease of decades lived simply. She wore a soft cardigan, faded at the elbows, and house slippers she refused to part with because they still had miles of comfort left in them. Inside her mailbox, among the usual bills and flyers, lay a sleek envelope. She already knew what it contained. Her son Elijah had called the night before, his voice full of boyish excitement. "Mom, I booked it. First class. Zurich. You're going to the book fair, just like you always dreamed. And you're not flying coach. You're going in style." Alma had smiled then. She smiled again now as she pulled the envelope close to her chest. It wasn't the ticket that moved her. It was the gesture. Elijah had always been a thoughtful boy, even when they had nothing. She remembered the time he'd given her a paper rose for Mother's Day, crafted from the comic section of the newspaper, because real flowers cost too much. That boy had grown into a man who ran LyraCorp Technologies, one of the largest AI defense contractors in the country. But to her, he was still the kid who stayed up late reading sci-fi novels by flashlight, the one who asked questions the teachers couldn't answer and built computer parts out of toaster scraps. She was proud of him, proud beyond words. But now, as she packed her single suitcase with careful precision, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. First class. What did that even feel like? The soft clink of crystal glasses, whispered service people in expensive clothes who somehow knew she didn't belong. She folded her best blouse, a blue silk one with pearl buttons, and placed it on top. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe she'd just pretend she belonged. Maybe she did. The next morning, she arrived at the Savannah airport, suitcase in hand, and caught her short connection to Atlanta. It was only an hour flight, but she felt the tension rising already. At Hartsfield-Jackson, the bustle was unlike anything she had seen in years. Uniforms, announcements, glossy storefronts. It felt like stepping into another dimension. But she followed the signs, asked politely when she needed help, and eventually found her way to the private terminal for Celestia first-class passengers. When the elevator doors opened, Alma stepped into the lounge, and her breath caught in her throat. It was like walking into a movie. Thick cream carpet, marble counters, velvet chairs the color of old wine, people dressed like they had personal stylists. A young man offered her a glass of cucumber-infused water before she even spoke. She accepted it with a nod and sat down near the corner window, clutching her bag on her lap. Everything felt too plush, too new. She took a deep breath, reminded herself this was her seat, her son's gift, her moment. But across the room, someone noticed her. A woman in a bright coral suit and matching heels narrowed her eyes at Alma over the top of her oversized sunglasses. She was thin in the brittle way expensive women often were, with flawless skin stretched tight across high cheekbones and hair dyed a rich honey blonde. A Louis Vuitton carry-on sat by her feet. Her phone, encrusted with rhinestones, never left her hand. Sloane Fairchild. Alma didn't know her name yet, but she recognized the look. A glance that began at her shoes and ended in a question mark. A glance that asked, not out loud but loud enough, "Are you lost?" Alma met her eyes for a moment and offered a polite smile. Sloane looked away. A lounge attendant approached Alma with a tray of small pastries. "May I?" the young woman asked. Alma chose a biscuit and thanked her, folding the napkin carefully in her lap. It was something her mother had taught her. Grace belonged everywhere, especially in places that said it didn't. She sipped her tea slowly and watched the world outside the large glass window. Planes taxied like obedient giants across the runway. Alma felt her heart flutter. She was going to Switzerland. At 74, a retired librarian, a widow, a black woman who had worked 3 jobs some years just to keep the lights on. And now she was going to Europe in first class. She smiled. Maybe she did belong here after all. Her phone buzzed. A message from Elijah. Just 2 words. Boarding soon. She tapped a reply, "I'm ready," and she was, or so she thought. Moments later, the loudspeaker announced now boarding Celestia Flight 913 to Zurich. First class and executive passengers may proceed to Gate 17A. Alma gathered her things, stood slowly, and walked toward the gate. She didn't notice that Sloane Fairchild stood up at the same time, or that the woman was already on the phone, her tone sharp. No. I told Marjorie to reserve my usual. You know I always fly seat 1C. There better not be any mistakes today." Behind her, Alma stepped into the jet bridge, unaware of the storm about to unfold. But it had already started. She just didn't know it yet. The Celestia First Class Lounge was an ecosystem unto itself, a place where time seemed to slow, where whispered conversations floated beneath the ambient jazz, and where glass walls offered sweeping views of runways stretching like ribbons across the landscape. The carpet was impossibly soft, the lighting perfectly balanced to flatter every complexion, and the scent a curated mix of sandalwood, citrus, and leather clung to the air like wealth itself. Alma Greene stood just inside the entrance, clutching her handbag a little tighter. A woman in a navy blue uniform with an updo so precise it looked sculpted approached her with a practiced smile. "Welcome to the Celestia Lounge, ma'am. May I see your boarding pass?" Alma handed it over without hesitation. The woman gave it a quick glance. Her eyes darted to Alma's modest shoes, her worn trench coat, then back to the name printed in bold Alma Greene. Seat 1C. There was a brief pause, not even a second, but Alma caught it, that familiar flicker in the eyes, the one that asked a question without saying a word. Still, the woman recovered quickly and stepped aside. "Right this way. Ms. Greene, please make yourself comfortable. Help yourself to the refreshments. If you need anything, just let us know." Alma smiled gently and nodded. She stepped inside, her pace calm, deliberate, though she could feel the pulse in her throat picking up. She had been in a lot of rooms in her 74 years. This one still managed to make her feel like she was walking on eggshells. The lounge wasn't crowded, but it was filled with presence. 2 men in tailored suits discussed hedge funds over glasses of bourbon despite the early hour. A younger woman tapped away at her laptop. phone balanced on one shoulder as she negotiated something urgent in Spanish. A man with a Rolex the size of a silver dollar scrolled through emails while sipping green tea. And then there was her, Sloane Fairchild, perched in a cream leather armchair near the center window, legs crossed, head tilted just enough to let the natural light catch her perfectly highlighted hair. Her coral pantsuit practically glowed against the muted background. Her diamond tennis bracelet sparkled with every flick of her hand as she typed furiously on her phone. When Alma walked past her to take a seat by the far wall, Sloane glanced up. Their eyes met. That same expression returned. Not overtly cruel, not hostile, dismissive. Alma had seen that look before, in banks, in department stores, in certain restaurants where the maitre d' would always say the table by the window was already reserved, even when it wasn't, but Alma didn't flinch. She gave a soft smile, just the curve of her lips, and lowered herself carefully into a seat by the window. From this spot, she could see the curve of a jet engine gleaming in the sun. Her flight. Zurich. It felt like a postcard come to life. A server approached with a silver tray. "Can I offer you a beverage, ma'am? We have champagne, green tea, sparkling water, just orange juice. Please," Alma replied. The server hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded and walked off. Alma folded her hands in her lap. She wasn't angry. Not yet. Not even uncomfortable. Really. She just noticed things. She had always been observant. It was what made her such a good librarian for all those years. Patterns, tone, energy, people's tells. She noticed, for example, that no one else in the lounge looked like her. That wasn't new. What mattered wasn't being the only one. What mattered was what people did with that information. The server returned with a glass of orange juice and a napkin with the Celestia logo embossed in gold. Alma accepted it with a quiet thank you, careful to keep her posture upright, her expression calm. Years of navigating spaces like this had taught her that presence was its own kind of armor. "Across the room," Sloane's voice rose. "No, I said I need the suite at the St. Clarion, not the Courtyard. What do you mean it's sold out? That's not acceptable. Marjorie, fix it." She ended the call with a dramatic exhale and looked around the lounge as if daring someone to acknowledge how hard her life was. Her gaze landed on Alma again. This time, it lingered. Alma held her eye. Sloane blinked first. Then, without a word, she picked up her phone again and began scrolling. Alma turned back to the window. She pulled out her phone and opened the text thread with Elijah. She scrolled through a few old messages, pictures of her garden, a short video of Elijah's daughter reciting a poem, a snapshot of a newspaper article about LyraCor's latest breakthrough, folded neatly on her nightstand. She smiled. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "This place is fancy," she typed, "but I feel like a guest at someone else's party." She erased it. Too heavy. Instead, she sent, "Boarding soon. Everything's fine. Thank you, sweetheart." The reply came almost instantly. "You're not a guest. Ma, you belong there. Don't forget that." She read it twice, then once more. A quiet warmth spread through her chest. A chime sounded overhead. The boarding call. "Celestia Flight 913 to Zurich is now boarding. First class and executive passengers. Please proceed to Gate 17A. The room stirred. Businessmen gathered their briefcases. The woman on her laptop snapped it shut. Sloane Fairchild stood up in one fluid motion, adjusting her suit jacket, slinging her Louis Vuitton bag over her shoulder. Alma rose more slowly, gathering her things with care. She smoothed the front of her blouse and checked that her ticket and passport were in the side pocket of her bag. As she made her way toward the gate, she heard Sloan ahead of her on the phone again. Seat 1C. Yes, I'm sure. I always fly that seat. They'd better not have messed it up. Alma blinked. Seat 1C. Her seat. There must be others labeled the same on different flights. It was probably nothing. She held her boarding pass just a little tighter. The walk to the gate felt longer than it was. People didn't rush in this terminal. Everything was velvet-roped and softly lit. She passed 2 lounge staff who smiled, but didn't quite meet her eyes. At the counter, the same woman who had checked her into the lounge earlier was now scanning boarding passes. Heather Blaine. She looked up, recognized Alma, and for the first time, smiled too brightly. "Ms. Greene," she said. "Welcome aboard." She scanned the pass, paused ever so slightly, then handed it back. "Enjoy your flight." Alma nodded and stepped forward. As she entered the jet bridge, the lighting shifted from warm lounge gold to cool airline silver. The air smelled different now. Processed, industrial, slightly metallic. A young flight attendant greeted her inside the aircraft. "Good morning, ma'am. First class is to your left." Alma thanked her and stepped into the front cabin. It took her breath away. Spacious pods lined each side of the aisle. Curved walls, private compartments, soft beige leather and chrome. It looked more like a luxury hotel room than a plane seat. She walked slowly to her seat, 1C. It was even more beautiful than she had imagined. She set her bag in the overhead bin with effort and lowered herself gently into the wide leather seat. She ran a hand along the armrest, tracing the smooth surface. Her fingers found the control panel recline. Lighting, massage settings. She took out her phone and snapped a photo of the view in front of her. "It's like a little apartment," she typed. "Thank you, my sweet boy. I feel like a queen." She pressed send. The reply came back instantly. "You've always been a queen. Ma, enjoy every second. I love you." She smiled and tucked her phone away. Across the aisle, a steward walked by offering pre-departure drinks. She accepted a glass of sparkling water and rested back into her seat. The hum of boarding continued behind her. She didn't see Sloan Fairchild step onto the plane moments later, but she would, and the world she had stepped into was about to show its true colors. The scent of fresh leather and filtered air greeted Alma the moment she stepped into the aircraft. For a brief, hopeful second, everything felt peaceful. The first-class cabin was bathed in soft light, and the muffled shuffle of passengers and crew made the environment feel like a sanctuary in motion. She moved carefully to her seat 1C and lowered herself into it with reverence. It was beautiful. A cream-toned pod with high walls that curved like a protective shell. The seat was wide enough to sleep in. The legroom was endless. There was a large entertainment screen to her right, and a side table just big enough for a novel and a warm cup of tea. She let her fingers explore the seat's buttons one by one. Recline, privacy shade, lumbar support. Everything worked with a quiet elegance. She smiled to herself. It really was like a small apartment in the sky, the kind of place she used to read about in magazines she couldn't afford. And now here she was, settling into it like she had always belonged. Across the aisle, a flight attendant with a sharp ponytail and tighter smile offered her a pre-departure drink. "Would you care for some champagne, Ms. Greene?" Alma blinked. "Just some water. Thank you." The woman nodded without warmth and disappeared down the aisle. Alma watched her go, then exhaled slowly. Something about that smile had felt rehearsed. She was no stranger to that brand of customer service politeness edged with judgment. She pulled her soft cardigan around her shoulders and looked out the small oval window. The sky was a clean, perfect blue. Behind her, the rest of the first-class passengers were still filtering in. Then a voice rose just behind the curtain at the cabin's entrance. It was high-pitched, sharp with frustration. "I'm sorry. That cannot be right. I always fly 1C. Always. Check again." Alma knew the voice instantly. "Sloane Fairchild." There was a pause as the gate agent responded, though her voice was too quiet for Alma to hear clearly. Then came Sloane again. "Well, someone made a mistake, and I don't like flying backwards. 3A is not acceptable." A few heads in first class turned toward the noise. Alma kept her eyes on the window. She didn't need to look to know where this was going. She'd been in rooms where her presence confused people. This was just another one of those rooms. The curtain rustled. A woman in coral stepped into the first-class cabin with quick, clipped steps. Sloane Fairchild's mouth was pressed into a hard line. Her eyes swept the cabin and locked instantly on Alma. Her expression flickered. Disbelief, offense, something bordering on anger. Alma didn't flinch. She gave a soft nod. "Good afternoon," she said quietly. Sloane did not reply. Instead, she pulled out her phone and took a photo of her own boarding pass. "Excuse me," she said, raising her voice as she looked toward the front of the cabin. A tall man in his early 40s stepped forward. His navy vest was pristine. A name tag read Darren Cho, flight purser. Sloane didn't waste time. "There's been a mix-up. I'm supposed to be in 1C. This woman is in my seat." Alma heard the sentence land, like a wet cloth dropped onto fine china. Darren looked between them. Then he gestured toward Sloane's boarding pass. "May I see it, ma'am?" She handed it over with theatrical annoyance. 3A, he said after a pause. "I don't sit in 3A, Sloane snapped. "Marjorie always books me in 1C or 1A. Always. This is a mistake." Darren turned to Alma now, hesitantly. "May I see your boarding pass as well?" "Ma'am," Alma nodded and retrieved it from her coat pocket. He read it. "Seat 1C. Valid. Confirmed." He swallowed. "I see. Thank you." He turned back to Sloane. "Ma'am, it appears seat 1C was properly assigned to Miss Greene." Sloane crossed her arms. "Then you need to fix the system. I am not flying sideways. I'm not paying for a premium experience to be shoved in some corner. This is ridiculous." She wasn't yelling, but her voice was sharp enough to pierce every inch of the cabin. Passengers began to glance over. No one said a word. Alma could feel the weight of the eyes, watching her, watching this unfold. That familiar heat spread in her chest again, the kind that came not from rage, but from shame, that didn't belong to her, but had been handed to her just the same. A new voice joined the scene. It was Tara Wyndham, the lead flight attendant, a young woman with platinum hair and a clipboard in hand. "What's the issue here?" she asked Darren, though her eyes were already on Sloane. "Seat assignment confusion," Darren replied. Tara turned to Sloane. "Everything okay, no?" Sloane said, "I've been put in the wrong seat, and that woman is sitting in the one I was supposed to have." Tara turned her gaze to Alma. She scanned the scene quickly. Something settled behind her eyes. A calculation. "Ms. Greene," she said, voice sugar smooth. "I think we may have had a little system error. Your seat is definitely in first class, but it looks like you were meant for seat 7C, not 1C. Alma blinked. "I'm sorry, 7C, Tara repeated. "Still first class. Still a lovely seat. But this is usually reserved for our elite tier flyers. There may have been a technical error when your ticket was processed. She smiled as if that explained everything. Alma didn't respond right away. She looked at Tara, then at Darren, then down at the boarding pass in her hand. It still said 1C. She raised her eyes slowly. I selected this seat with my son. He booked it for me. It was no mistake. I understand, Tara said. Her tone dipped just enough to sound like a teacher correcting a stubborn child. These systems glitch sometimes. But Ms. Fairchild is one of our most frequent flyers. We're simply trying to avoid a further issue. Alma felt the knot in her chest tighten. They were making it her problem. She was suddenly the obstacle, the delay, the woman who had to be handled so that the more important passenger could have what she wanted. She felt her throat tighten, but kept her voice level. With all due respect, this is my seat. I have a valid ticket, and I would prefer to remain here. Tara's lips thinned. Ma'am, she said, no longer sweet. We're asking you to cooperate. We don't want to escalate this. Everyone would like to get to Zurich on time, Darren added. The captain is waiting to close the doors. The message was clear. Cooperate or be the reason for everyone's inconvenience. Alma felt the familiar press of shame again. She glanced around the cabin. Eyes flicked away. No one offered support. No one stood up. It was just her. She could feel the tightness in her chest blooming like a bruise. Still, she looked up. I'm not moving, she said, quietly but firmly. This is my assigned seat. I've done nothing wrong. Tara sighed and stepped closer. Ma'am, we are authorized to reassign seats as needed for operational efficiency and guest satisfaction. If you continue to refuse, I will have to involve the captain. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Alma's hands trembled slightly. She opened her bag, reached for her phone. She didn't want a scene. She didn't want to be here. But she wasn't going to disappear for someone else's comfort. She looked Tara in the eye. Before I move, she said, her voice low, I need to make a call. Tara glanced at her watch. Please make it quick. We're already behind schedule. Alma nodded. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She tapped her favorite contact. Elijah. The phone rang once, twice. Then his voice, calm and warm. Hey, Ma. Everything okay? Alma closed her eyes. No, sweetheart, she whispered. We may have a problem. Elijah Greene stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of a 42nd-story boardroom in Washington, D.C., his gaze fixed on the city's gray horizon. Beyond the marble conference table behind him, his team quietly gathered documents for their next strategic review. A senator from Georgia was scheduled to arrive in less than 10 minutes, but none of that mattered right now. His phone buzzed softly in his hand. His mother's name lit up the screen. He answered before the second ring. Hey, Ma. Everything okay? There was a pause, a tremble. Then her voice came through, soft but strained. I'm sorry to call. Elijah, I know you're working, but I think something's happening on the plane. Something strange. He moved away from the glass, heart tightening. Tell me everything. On the other end. Alma explained it as calmly as she could. The seat assignment, the pressure, the flight attendants asking her to move. The woman who claimed the seat was hers. The way people stared but said nothing. The way her voice had started to feel small, even though she'd done nothing wrong. Elijah listened in silence, not interrupting, not reacting, not yet. When she finished, she added, I haven't moved, but they're trying to make me. And for a moment, the world went still. In that silence, Elijah Greene made a decision. "Thank you for telling me." "Ma," he said, his voice low. "Don't move. Not 1 inch. Just stay seated if you can. If you're already standing, stay where you are. I'm going to handle it. Stay on the line. Okay?" "Yes, dear." "Good." He muted the call and turned back to the room. "Bryn," he called. Bryn Carter, his chief operating officer, looked up instantly. The urgency in his voice snapped the energy in the room into full attention. "I need you now." He stepped into his private office and closed the door behind her. "My mother is on a flight to Zurich. Celestia Flight 913. She's being harassed by crew and a passenger. They're trying to force her out of her first-class seat to appease someone who believes she belongs elsewhere. It's happening right now." Bryn's face darkened. "Tell me what you need." Elijah didn't hesitate. "Freeze the Celestia contract. Effective immediately. That's $82 million annually in enterprise travel spend. Put it in writing. Make it official. Suspend all bookings. Call Randall Ayers directly. No voicemail. No assistant. He picks up the phone, or we walk permanently." Bryn was already pulling out her phone. "What's the message?" "Tell him a member of their crew tried to publicly humiliate the mother of our CEO, a fully ticketed guest in Seat 1C. Tell him she was targeted because she didn't look like someone who belonged there. And tell him if that plane leaves the gate before this is resolved. They're not just losing our account. They're losing our support permanently." "And what do you want done?" "I want the captain of that aircraft to personally apologize to my mother. I want the crew removed from further contact with her for the duration of the flight. And I want those responsible suspended pending full review. Names, documentation, all of it. On my desk." "Understood." Elijah unmuted the call. "Ma." "I'm here. I'm still standing," she said softly. "They're waiting for me to move." "Don't move. Look straight ahead. Let them wait. On the plane." Tara was pacing subtly, casting glances at her watch. Darren was trying to avoid eye contact with both women. The cabin felt taut with invisible wires of tension. The door hadn't closed yet. Other passengers were now fully aware something was happening. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others stared openly. Sloane Fairchild sat in seat 3A, arms crossed, jaw tight. She had overheard just enough of the phone call to realize something was shifting, but not enough to know which direction it was going. She didn't care, as far as she was concerned. She was still in the right. If this woman had any self-awareness, she'd step aside, accept the better seat, and stop holding things up for everyone else. The entitlement in her silence said more than her words. Alma stood still, holding the phone gently to her ear. She didn't feel angry. Not exactly. She felt disappointed. She had spent her entire life trying not to cause trouble, always patient, always careful, always kind. She had paid her taxes, raised her son with everything she had, worked honest jobs, helped neighbors, buried friends, and fed strangers. And still, here she was, at 74, being asked to prove she belonged. She was so tired of being tested. "Ma'am," Tara said again. Her tone edged now with irritation. "We need to close the doors." Alma didn't answer. She just stood there, Elijah's quiet breath still in her ear. The silence was broken by the sharp, unexpected ring of the cockpit's communication line. Darren moved quickly to answer it. A moment later, the front cabin door flew open. A man in a blazer and headset stormed onto the plane. He bypassed the line of business travelers waiting at the rear and walked directly into first class. His expression was pale, tight, urgent. He whispered something to Darren. Darren's face shifted. The man moved toward the cockpit. Tara froze mid-step. Passengers looked around, sensing a ripple of alarm beneath the surface. The cockpit door opened. The man leaned in and spoke quickly to the captain. Then came silence, a long one. And finally, the cockpit door opened again. Captain Greg Marlowe stepped into the cabin, his expression unreadable. He walked past seat 3A, past Tara, and stopped directly in front of Alma Greene. "Mrs. Greene," he said, his voice even. "My name is Captain Marlowe. On behalf of Celestia Airlines, I would like to personally apologize for the way you've been treated by our staff. This situation should never have occurred. You have done nothing wrong. I am here to correct that now." Alma blinked. He gestured toward seat 1C. "Please, allow me to help you return to your seat." There was a flicker of surprise in the cabin. Several heads turned. Sloane sat rigid, lips pressed tight. Tara's face was flushed with confusion. Darren looked down at the carpet. Alma looked at the captain, then at the seat, then at Tara. She let the silence settle around her like falling snow. "Captain," she said quietly, "I appreciate your apology, but I'm not sure I want to return to that seat." He hesitated. "May I ask why?" "Because your crew made it very clear they don't believe I belong there, and I no longer feel safe in their care." "Mrs. Greene, I assure you," she held up a hand, "I believe you're sincere. I do. But safety isn't just about seatbelts and oxygen masks. It's about being seen, about being treated with basic decency. Today, I was denied that." He didn't respond. What could he say? Alma turned her eyes to the exit door. "I'd like to deplane now. Please." Tara stepped forward quickly. "Ma'am, please, let's not escalate." "You already did," Alma said gently. She turned to the captain again. "I'd appreciate my carry-on." "Of course," he said. He reached above and retrieved her bag himself. She took it, nodded once, and began walking down the aisle. As she passed seat 3A, Sloane shifted uncomfortably. Alma didn't look at her. She didn't need to. Behind her, silence reigned. She stepped into the jet bridge just as Elijah's voice returned softly through the phone. "Are you off the plane?" "Yes," she whispered. "Good," he said. "A car's waiting for you. You're going to Teterboro. I've arranged a private jet. You'll be more comfortable, and you'll still make the book fare." Tears pricked her eyes, but she smiled. "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes, I did. This isn't about a seat. Ma, it's about your dignity." The silence left behind in the cabin after Alma deplaned was thick enough to cut through. Sloane Fairchild sat in 3A, hands folded tightly in her lap, trying not to show the heat rising up her neck. The moment hadn't gone how she expected. She had anticipated a quiet seat reassignment, maybe a few apologies, and certainly no disruption to her travel plans. Instead, she'd watched the captains of a major airline publicly apologize to a woman she was convinced didn't belong in first class. And that woman, elderly, composed, far too calm, had chosen to walk off the plane rather than be diminished. It unsettled her in a way she didn't like to admit. Tara Wyndham adjusted her scarf and walked briskly to the galley. The moment the curtain closed behind her, she let out a frustrated sigh and pulled out her service tablet. She tapped through the logs, reviewing the crew schedule, then reopened the passenger manifest. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She'd been in the airline industry for 12 years, knew every policy, every protocol, and every customer satisfaction loophole. But she also knew the unspoken order of things, the way high-value passengers got treated differently, the way certain complaints were prioritized, and others were quietly filed away. This time, she had misread the room. She didn't understand who Alma Greene was, or rather, who her son was. She didn't know about the phone call, the private jet being arranged, the corporate travel freeze that had just been initiated at LyraCore Technologies. But she was about to find out. In Washington. Elijah Greene stood in front of a live dashboard showing every LyraCore travel contract, booking channel, and vendor partner. Bryn Carter was on the phone with Randall Ayers, Celestia Airlines Executive Vice President. She wasn't shouting. Bryn never shouted. But her words were crisp, deliberate, final. Randall, we've issued the freeze. You'll see it reflected within the hour. I hope you understand this isn't a bluff. Mr. Greene's mother was humiliated on one of your jets. Your crew sided with an entitled passenger and tried to eject a legally seated elderly woman from her spot. This is unacceptable. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, a thin, nervous voice. We were unaware she was related to Elijah Greene. That's exactly the problem, Bryn replied coldly. She shouldn't have to be someone's mother to be treated with dignity. The line went quiet again. Meanwhile, back aboard Flight 913, the door had been closed, and the plane began its slow taxi down the runway. The energy in the first-class cabin had shifted. Some passengers whispered to one another. Others stared ahead, pretending not to feel the ripple of discomfort. Darren Cho returned to the front row and knelt beside Sloane's seat. Ms. Fairchild, he said carefully, I'd like to apologize for the earlier confusion. We understand your usual preference for 1C. This was a unique situation. She didn't look at him. She wasn't ready to let go of her indignation. Not yet. Unique is one word for it, she muttered. I've flown Celestia for 17 years. This is the first time I've had to fight for basic comfort. We understand, Darren said. We'll be issuing a goodwill voucher to your account. She finally turned to him. That woman, she didn't belong in first class. You know it. Everyone could tell. I was just trying to maintain the standards your airline is known for. Darren flinched slightly. Ma'am, that woman was seated correctly. Then he stood up and walked away. Sloane leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. No one was thanking her. No one was taking her side. The crew had gone quiet. Even other passengers now avoided her gaze. She felt exposed, uncomfortable, but not wrong. She still believed she'd done what was necessary. And if that woman hadn't belonged in that seat, someone had to say it. In the rear galley. Tara tapped on her tablet again. The screen glitched. Then a red bar flashed across the top. Access denied. Corporate booking locked. LyraCore Holdings. She frowned. She refreshed the screen. Same error. She opened the crew app and tried accessing the upgrade logs for the Zurich route. Another red banner appeared. Request blocked. Client freeze. In effect. What the hell, she whispered. She looked up and caught Darren's eye across the aisle. He was reading something on his own device. His expression hardened. Tara motioned him over. Look at this, she whispered, turning the tablet toward him. He scanned the screen. His jaw clenched. They froze the account. What LyraCore just locked their corporate travel spend. No more bookings. All Celestia vendor privileges on hold. That's massive. Darren's voice was barely above a whisper. Tara's face paled. What does that mean for us? Darren didn't answer. He was already walking toward the front of the plane. In New York, at Celestia's Global Operations Center. The news spread like a wildfire. By the time Randall Ayers got off the call with Bryn Carter, the legal team was already drafting statements. Someone from PR had initiated crisis protocol. The words discrimination and executive retaliation had been mentioned in 3 different departments within 10 minutes. By noon, Elijah Greene's assistant had received 7 voicemails requesting a conversation. None had been returned. Back on Flight 913, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to some updated routing information, we'll be pausing briefly before takeoff. Thank you for your patience." No one moved. No one spoke. In seat 3A. Sloane turned slowly toward the front of the cabin. She could feel it. Something was happening. She wasn't sure what. But for the first time, a sliver of doubt pierced through her entitlement. What if she had miscalculated? What if that woman hadn't just been another out-of-place passenger? What if she had mattered more than she thought? Up in the flight deck. Captain Marlowe set his headset down and rubbed his temples. He'd been flying for 26 years, but this day would stick with him. He didn't like being in the middle of things that went above his rank. But when the direct line from Celestia headquarters buzzed again, he had no choice but to answer. "We need to pause the flight," came the voice from dispatch. "Why, we've got a senior executive freezing accounts over what happened. You need to remain on the ground until further instructions. So we're grounded temporarily. Stay parked. A liaison will be reaching the aircraft shortly." The captain sighed. "Understood." He clicked off the call and turned to his co-pilot. "You ever hear of Elijah Greene?" The co-pilot shook his head. "You will," the captain muttered, back in her seat. Tara stared at the frozen booking screen again. Her heart pounded in her chest. They had lost the account. Suspended. Effective immediately. All because she tried to move a woman who didn't look like she belonged. But what if she did? What if she had been more than a passenger? What if she'd been someone who'd spent a lifetime being pushed aside and had finally decided enough was enough? Tara looked out the window. The plane wasn't moving, and neither, it seemed, was her career. At precisely 12:32 p.m. Eastern Time, a quiet internal memo from LyraCorp's legal division began circulating to key executives across industries. The subject line was simple: Celestia Airlines Partnership Indefinite Hold. Within 30 minutes, it had been shared more than 200 times. The memo didn't include the full story. It didn't need to. Rumors filled in the gaps. A major client, a discriminatory incident, a high-level freeze. Senior travel executives began texting one another, asking, "Did you hear? Is it true? Was it really Elijah Greene's mother?" By 1 p.m., reporters were sniffing around, and at 1:17 p.m., an anonymous staffer inside Celestia Airlines leaked an internal chat thread to a mid-level aviation journalist. That journalist tweeted one sentence: "Flight attendant asks elderly black woman to give up first-class seat." Woman was CEO's mother. Entire account frozen. The tweet exploded within minutes. By the time Elijah saw it, it had already been viewed over 2 million times. He didn't retweet it. He didn't like it. He simply sat at his desk, shoulders squared, fingers steepled in front of his lips, and waited. Across the city, Randall Ayers sat at a long conference table with 3 vice presidents, 2 compliance officers, and 1 red-faced HR director. On the wall behind them, the company logo shimmered in backlit silver, but the room felt anything but polished. "How bad is it?" Ayers asked, already knowing the answer. Legal was blunt. "If we don't address this now, it escalates by end of day. Greene is too powerful. The optics are too obvious. and we now have visual confirmation that his mother was the one removed or pressured to leave the seat she paid for. Does she have media representation? Not yet, but someone will find her by this afternoon. If she gives a statement, we're done. Ayers rubbed his temples. What do we do? Start with the crew? Ground them? Immediately? Reassign or suspend? Make it clear we take this seriously. And the passenger who caused it, Sloane Fairchild. She's a known flyer, high value, but not worth this storm. So, she's on her own. Exactly. Meanwhile, back aboard Flight 913. The plane remained stationary on the tarmac. 24 minutes had passed since Alma had stepped off. The engines were still silent. The doors remained sealed. In first class. Sloane shifted in her seat for the 5th time. She had asked for a flight update. None came. She had pressed the attendant call button. No one responded. It was starting to sink in. For the first time in her life, she realized she might not be the most important person on board. Her lips tightened. She crossed her legs the other way, feeling something foreign rise inside her. It wasn't guilt, not yet. It was fear. Fear that she had overplayed her hand. Tara, meanwhile, sat alone in the galley, her back pressed against a metal cabinet, arms folded tight across her chest. The other crew members avoided her eyes. The silence was damning. Her mind played the scene again and again. The look in Alma's eyes not angry, not even confrontational, just disappointed, hurt, like she had expected it all along. Tara had known something was wrong even as she spoke the words. We need to move you. She had felt it in her throat. But she said it anyway. She said it because she thought it was harmless, because she thought she could smooth it over, because she believed her job was to keep the peace. But she hadn't kept the peace. She'd betrayed her own instincts to accommodate the wrong person. And now, the weight of that choice sat heavy in her chest. In seat 6D, a man in a gray business suit whispered to his wife, "That was her, the woman in 1C. I saw her picture on Twitter." The woman nodded slowly. "Do you think she'll speak out?" "I hope she does." In Zurich, news crews were already being dispatched to the airport. Word had spread. A powerful American CEO's mother humiliated. A first-class injustice. The kind of story that didn't just trend. The kind that echoed. The kind that changed things. In a quiet hotel room across town, Alma Greene sat on the edge of a freshly made bed, still in her travel clothes. A white envelope sat beside her, a handwritten welcome card from the private aviation service, a fruit basket on the table, a pot of chamomile tea she hadn't touched. She hadn't turned on the television. She didn't need to. Her phone buzzed again. Elijah. He hadn't stopped checking in. She answered. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Tired, understandably." There was a pause. "Do you regret not staying on the plane?" he asked softly. "No. I regret that I was ever made to feel I had to choose." His voice was quiet. "I'm proud of you." "Ma, I'm not trying to be brave," she said. "I'm just tired of making myself smaller, to avoid making other people uncomfortable. You didn't make anyone uncomfortable." "I did," she said, "just by being seen." Elijah didn't argue. He knew she was right. Later that afternoon, Tara received a call from her supervisor. She stepped off the plane and into a corner of the jet bridge to take it. "Tara, we've been instructed to remove you from rotation until further notice." "Am I suspended?" "You're being reassigned pending investigation." "What does that mean?" "It means go home. Someone will reach out." and Tara don't talk to the press. She stared at the floor after the call ended. Her reflection in the polished tile looked older, more tired than it had a day ago. When she exited the terminal that night, the air outside felt different. Every step she took felt like she was walking deeper into something she hadn't fully understood before. Darren Cho was next. He was told to file a formal report, include all communications, every detail. He did so without protest. But in his final line, he wrote something that stuck with HR for hours. I believe the guest was just another elderly woman. But now I see that no matter who she was, she deserved to be treated better, and I failed in that. It was the first honest thing he had written in a company log in over a decade. The next morning, a major media outlet ran the headline, "She had a first-class ticket. They asked her to move. Then they found out who her son was." Elijah didn't read the article. He didn't need to. He already knew how the world would spin it. But what mattered most to him wasn't the media coverage, or the corporate statements, or even the internal investigations. It was his mother, and the quiet dignity she carried as she stood her ground without anger, without theatrics, without cruelty. He knew the world wouldn't remember every name in this story, but they'd remember her. The video was only 14 seconds long, blurry, vertical, filmed discreetly from across the aisle. It showed an elderly woman standing quietly in front of her seat in first class, while a flight attendant gestured toward the rear of the cabin. The woman didn't raise her voice. She barely moved. But there was something in the stillness of her body, something steady, almost defiant, that captured people. She didn't scream. She didn't threaten. She just stood there, holding her phone, her posture as firm as stone, while the crew member leaned in, pressing harder. That video went viral. By 7:41 a.m. the following morning, by 8:12, Alma Greene's name was trending globally. The story was being shared across every platform: Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, even LinkedIn. But what made it different wasn't the outrage. It was the quiet grief in the responses. People weren't just angry. They were exhausted. They recognized Alma. She was their grandmother, their mother, the neighbor next door who always brought extra food to the community center, the church elder who stayed behind to clean pews after service, the woman who paid for her own flight and still got treated like an intruder. The hashtags began to multiply. Seat 1C. Stand with Alma. Dignity flies in every repost. There were stories of others who had been asked to step aside, to move, to wait, to accept less, just to keep the peace. One comment stood out. She didn't raise her voice because she knew that if she did, she'd become the problem. She stood still because the world already sees her as a disruption just for existing. Another wrote, "She didn't lose her seat. She surrendered it to keep her dignity." The wave kept growing. Morning talk shows debated the fallout. Travel forums exploded with demands for reform. And for the first time in years, Celestia Airlines customer support lines crashed under the pressure. At a small cafe in Zurich, Alma sipped her tea in silence, unaware that millions were speaking her name. She didn't own a Twitter account. She had no idea she was being called brave, or iconic, or a catalyst for something larger. She was just trying to keep her hands from shaking. Across the table, Elijah scrolled through his phone, watching it all unfold in real time. "You've gone global. Ma." She looked up with tired eyes. "I don't want to go global." He smiled gently. "It's too late." She stirred her tea slowly. "All I did was stand. That's exactly why they're listening." He leaned back and looked at her, the way a son looks at someone who made him who he is. You showed the world what grace under pressure looks like." She smiled faintly. "I didn't feel graceful." "You were." That afternoon, Celestia Airlines CEO released an official statement. "We deeply regret the incident that occurred aboard Flight 913. Our company is founded on the principles of respect and inclusion. We failed to uphold those values. We are taking immediate steps to retrain staff, investigate internal protocols, and ensure no guest is ever treated this way again." It wasn't enough. The public wanted more than regret. They wanted responsibility. They wanted names. They wanted action. And quietly, behind closed doors, they got it. Tara Windham received a call from HR at 3:00 p.m. sharp. "Tara, we're initiating a formal review. You'll be placed on indefinite administrative leave, effective immediately." She swallowed hard. "Is this final?" "No. But it's serious. We recommend you consult representation." The line went quiet after that. She sat on her apartment floor, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the wall. She hadn't imagined things ending like this. She had built a career around knowing how to read people, how to manage difficult situations, how to keep flights running smoothly. But she had failed where it mattered most. She had read the room, but not the woman. And now, the world was reading her. In a post with over 2 million likes, someone had written, "Tara Windham didn't just reassign a seat. She reassigned someone's worth." It felt like a knife. In another city. Darren Cho logged out of his work tablet, removed his name badge, and sat alone in his car. He hadn't been suspended. Not yet. But he knew it was coming. And the worst part wasn't the consequences. It was the truth. He'd known what was happening was wrong. But he didn't speak up. He had let it happen because it was easier to stay silent. He stared at the steering wheel. Then, without even realizing it, he whispered, "I'm sorry," in her hotel room. Alma sat on the edge of the bed, holding a small photo frame she always traveled with. A younger Elijah was smiling in a graduation cap, arms slung around her shoulder. Her late husband, David, had taken the photo. She could still hear him laughing in the background that day. He would have been proud, but he also would have been angry. Not at the airline, at how long she had carried the weight of keeping calm in the face of everything. At how often she had been told to forgive, to smile, to take the high road. At how many times she had done so, even when it hurt. She pressed her palm to the photo and closed her eyes. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. It was Elijah. "Thought you might want to see this." He handed her a printed email, a message from one of the airline board members, addressed to him directly. It read, "Mr. Greene, on behalf of the board of directors, I want to personally apologize for the events aboard Flight 913. We recognize this as more than a service failure. It was a moral failure. The board has scheduled an emergency review session. We'd like your input on long-term reforms." Alma scanned the message. Her fingers tightened on the paper. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I know. I want this to matter." Elijah nodded. "Then let's make sure it does." Back in the States, a small civil rights foundation posted a new fundraising campaign. Help us create a program to educate airline professionals on unconscious bias, inclusion, and dignity in service. Inspired by Alma Greene's story. Within 4 hours, they raised over $300. In schools, teachers printed her photo and used it as a lesson on courage and presence. In living rooms, mothers and grandmothers held hands a little tighter, knowing what it meant to walk quietly through a world that often demanded they shrink. And in one anonymous post, someone wrote, "She taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not move." The boardroom at Celestia Airlines global headquarters had never been so quiet. 14 executives sat in high-backed leather chairs around a table shaped like a sleek wing. Each one had a legal folder in front of them. Some tapped pens nervously. Some kept their hands folded, lips pressed shut. At the head of the table sat Randall Ayers, eyes hollow from lack of sleep. A single screen on the wall replayed the silent footage from Flight 913 on loop. Alma Greene, standing, Tara Wyndham, motioning, Alma, unmoving. Then darkness as the clip ended. Over and over again. They had all seen it. Now they were seeing it again with legal consequences. The general counsel stood up. "Let's be clear. What happened on that flight is indefensible. We can argue miscommunication. We can cite policy loopholes. But the fact remains our crew asked an elderly black woman with a paid first-class ticket to vacate her seat for a more familiar customer. That's the narrative. That's the truth, whether it was intentional or not." A younger executive leaned forward. "Do we know for sure it was a race issue?" The counsel looked at him hard. "If you're still asking that, you haven't been paying attention." Randall rubbed his temples. "What's the exposure PR disaster? Social media revolt, potential lawsuit from the Greene family, major clients watching, press lining up, and Elijah Greene is refusing to meet unless our internal investigation removes bias from the crew that handled the flight." A silence settled over the room again. Finally, Randall spoke. "Ground the crew. All of them. Re-education. Full evaluation. We need someone from HR. Someone from DEI, and someone from legal reviewing every training manual. We're not just cleaning house, we're rewriting it." He looked up, jaw tight. "And send a formal letter to Mr. Greene. Not a PR statement, a human one. From me, across the city." Elijah sat in his office, phone pressed to his ear. "I didn't ask for anyone to get fired," he said quietly. Bryn Carter's voice came through the line. "They're not waiting for you to ask. The pressure's coming from everywhere." He exhaled. "This isn't about punishment. This is about structure, culture. Why a crew even thought they could do that and face no consequences." Bryn's voice dropped. "I think that's what scares them most." Eli stood, walking to the window. "Good. Maybe fear is a start." On the other side of the ocean, in her quiet Zurich hotel room, Alma Greene sat by the window with a journal open in her lap. She hadn't written in years, but something about this moment pulled at her, a need to put thoughts into words, not for the world, for herself. She wrote slowly, "Today, I am tired, not from age, not from the flight, not from the media, but from carrying silence. For too many years, I have been expected to be graceful in the face of insult, to smile through dismissal, to be the peacemaker in rooms that should have never broken peace to begin with. But something changed when I was asked to move. It wasn't the seat. It was the assumption that I wouldn't mind giving it up, that I should yield because I always have, that I'd step aside because I'd rather not cause discomfort, that I'd choose politeness over pride. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I didn't curse, but I didn't move. And somehow, that still shook the world. I don't want to be a symbol. I want to be seen." She paused, blinking tears away, then wrote one more line. "I want to teach my granddaughter that her place in this world is not up for negotiation." Downstairs, in the lobby, Elijah was speaking quietly with a woman from the consulate. He had flown in overnight. No press, no noise. He came for her. We're flying home tomorrow. He told the woman, but I'd like some privacy until then. The woman nodded. Understood. We'll keep press away from the airport entrance. When he returned to the room, Alma closed the journal and smiled. Did you eat? Not yet. I had them send up soup. Always taking care of me. She chuckled. Old habits. He sat beside her on the small couch, the same way he had as a boy during stormy nights when thunder shook the windows. She used to read him poetry back then, the kind that wrapped the room in stillness. Now, the roles had reversed. He was the one protecting, but she was still the one carrying the most weight. What happens next? She asked. He paused. We go home. Then I go to Washington. There's a hearing scheduled industry oversight. I've been asked to speak. She looked at him. And you will? Yes. But not about money, about dignity, about what it means when policy forgets people. She smiled again. That's the son I raised. He leaned over and rested his head on her shoulder. I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm not, she said softly. It reminded me that I still matter, even when the world says I don't. That night, Alma's story aired on 3 major networks. But what surprised everyone was what she didn't say. In a recorded statement released with her permission, she didn't name the flight attendants. She didn't demand apologies. She didn't even speak about being disrespected. Instead, she said this. I've lived long enough to know that systems don't change because one person demands it. They change when that demand becomes a chorus. If my experience can spark that chorus, then I don't need vengeance. I just want people to think twice before they assume someone doesn't belong. Because everyone belongs somewhere. And sometimes, we just need to be still enough to let them show us. The internet lit up again. But this time, not with fury, with awe, with respect, with a kind of collective humility. Even the harshest corners of the internet had fewer jokes this time. There was something unshakable about the way Alma carried herself, the way she refused to become bitter, the way she refused to shrink. And even the people who disagreed with her couldn't deny the truth in her words. Back in the States, Tara Wyndham watched the video on her laptop, tears welling in her eyes. She hadn't left her apartment in 2 days. The blinds were drawn. Her badge sat on the table next to an unopened bottle of wine. When Alma spoke, Tara didn't hear condemnation. She heard clarity, and for the first time, she understood what she had taken from someone, not a seat, but a sense of place. And she whispered into the quiet of her apartment, I'm sorry. Alma, I see you now. The Congressional hearing chamber in Washington buzzed with cameras, soft murmurs, and the shuffle of briefcases. It wasn't just another industry check-in. This time, there were eyes from every direction: press, advocacy groups, CEOs, and quietly watching at the back, a few airline employees with folded arms and darting eyes. The room wasn't there to witness policy. They came to witness accountability. At the front, under the seal of the United States Congress, sat a panel of officials prepared to question major airline executives about recent discrimination claims. But the energy in the room shifted the moment Elijah Greene walked in. He wasn't there as a CEO today. He wasn't even introduced that way. He sat at the witness table under a different label, family of impacted passenger. He wore a dark suit, no tie, his shirt collar slightly open. There was a calm in his presence that pulled attention without asking for it. He didn't glance around for cameras. He didn't posture. He just waited. One of the committee members leaned into the mic. Mr. Greene, thank you for appearing today. We understand you didn't have to. Elijah nodded. I didn't, but I needed to. A few murmurs echoed through the audience. He cleared his throat. I'm here as a son. My mother, Alma Greene, boarded Flight 913 with a first-class ticket. She was offered cucumber water in the lounge. She was seated properly. Then she was approached by a crew member and asked to give up her seat to accommodate another guest. She wasn't given a reason, just a request that came loaded with decades of unspoken assumptions. He paused, not dramatically, just honestly. She declined, politely. She was firm. She didn't make a scene, but she got off that plane because she knew that if she stayed, she'd become the problem. He looked out across the room, not accusing, just steady. You see, people like my mother have spent their whole lives making themselves smaller so that others can feel comfortable. And I think we've reached a point in this industry, in this country, where we need to ask why. There was no sound, not a cough, not a shuffle. He continued, this isn't just about race, though that's a massive part of it. It's about dignity. It's about how we've normalized a hierarchy of worthiness when it comes to service. It's about the unspoken codes we teach airline staff who to smile longer at, who to accommodate first, whose complaints we escalate, and whose we dismiss. A congresswoman leaned forward. Mr. Greene, are you suggesting this is systemic? He looked her in the eye. Yes. And not just in Celestia Airlines. It's across the board. I've had meetings with executives from 4 other carriers since the incident. Not a single one denied that similar events have happened under their watch. The chairman folded his hands. What's your recommendation? Elijah took a breath. 3 things. First, mandatory bias training for all frontline airline staff, not just check-the-box seminars, but lived experience workshops facilitated by diverse voices. Second, a passenger bill of dignity rights that extend beyond lost luggage and boarding groups. Third, transparency and complaint handling. When a passenger reports discrimination, they deserve to know what's done with that report. He tapped the desk gently. We have the technology. We have the money. What we need is the will. In the back row, unseen by most. Alma Greene sat quietly. She wore a navy blue suit jacket with a silver brooch on the collar, her only piece of jewelry. Her hands were clasped in her lap. Her eyes didn't leave her son. She had debated coming, but something told her she needed to see it for herself. To see her son not just as her boy, but as a man standing in the face of power and asking it to look inward. As the session recessed, reporters swarmed the corridor, but Elijah didn't stop to speak. He walked directly to where Alma stood, smiled, and gently took her hand. You okay? Mashi nodded. You were clear, calm, brave. You taught me that. Back at Celestia's headquarters, the fallout continued. An internal email had been leaked showing senior management's early attempts to minimize the Flight 913 incident. It wasn't malicious, but it revealed a culture of denial phrases like, let's not escalate this, and likely a miscommunication were underlined and read across dozens of social posts. Sloane Fairchild's name had become a lightning rod. She had gone from anonymous passenger to public symbol overnight. In one viral thread, someone wrote, "She's the face of entitlement without awareness, the person who believes their preferences are policies." Sloane tried to lie low, but the internet didn't forget. And though she had once enjoyed speaking engagements on luxury travel, her bookings were quietly canceled, her inbox flooded with backlash. Her assistant quit without notice, but she didn't disappear completely. In a brief interview with a magazine that once featured her socialite lifestyle, she said something that surprised even her critics. "I didn't realize what I was doing until I saw the footage. I thought I was protecting my comfort. But what I did was strip comfort from someone else. I haven't asked for forgiveness, but I am trying to understand. It wasn't an apology, but it was a beginning. For Tara Wyndham, the process of reckoning was slower. She attended her first unconscious bias training session 2 weeks after the incident. She sat in the back, didn't speak, but she listened. And in one session, after a facilitator asked everyone to describe the last time they ignored their gut, she raised her hand. "I knew she was telling the truth," Tara said. "I knew she belonged in that seat, but I let fear of complaint override my instinct. I didn't stand up for her, and I hate that I have to live with that." The room was silent. The facilitator nodded. That's where change starts. Back in Georgia, Alma returned home quietly. There were flowers on her porch, cards in her mailbox, handwritten letters from strangers. One from a young girl read, "Thank you for showing me that it's okay to be still when you know you're right." She placed that one on her fridge, and in the evenings, as she watered her marigolds again, neighbors waved with a little more warmth. People she'd known for years now saw her differently, not just as a soft-spoken woman from church, but as someone who had stood with grace and taught the world something it needed to learn. Elijah visited often. They didn't always talk about the hearing, or the airline, or the headlines. Sometimes they just sat on the porch, listening to the wind stir the leaves. And on one of those quiet nights, Alma said, almost to herself, "You know, I never wanted to cause a stir. I just wanted to go where I was invited and be left in peace." Elijah reached for her hand. "And now, because you didn't move, 1,000 doors have opened." She smiled, watching the sun dip low across the sky. "Let's just hope people walk through them." A soft rain fell on the sidewalk outside the LyraCorp campus in Atlanta, but it didn't stop the crowd from gathering. What had started as a small community gesture, a few people lighting candles to honor Alma Greene, had grown into a demonstration of something much larger. Families, activists, students, airline employees, and strangers stood together beneath umbrellas and ponchos, holding signs not of protest, but of solidarity. Some read, "Dignity has no boarding group. I stand for seat 1C. We all deserve to arrive whole." There was no shouting, no chants, just presence. A quiet sea of people who were done being quiet, for the wrong reasons. Inside the building, Elijah watched from the third-floor window. He stood beside Bryn Carter, LyraCorp COO, who had been instrumental in guiding their company's internal review since the incident. Her eyes stayed on the crowd, unreadable. "That's not just a social movement," she said softly. "That's a message to every company watching." Elijah nodded. "And every person who's ever been told to move, give up, or wait their turn." He turned to her. "The board approved the new passenger dignity standards unanimously," Bryn said, "including training protocols, auditing partners for discrimination claims, and formal review before renewing any travel partnerships." "Good," Elijah said. "I want to present it myself. And I want my mother's name on the documentation, not as a victim, as the reason it exists." Bryn looked at him for a moment. "Is she okay with that? She didn't ask for any of this, but she said something yesterday that I can't let go of." He glanced back at the window. "She said, maybe my stillness gave other people permission to stop shrinking." Outside, the candles flickered in the mist. A child sat on his father's shoulders, holding a laminated printout of Alma's now iconic airport photo, her standing, clutching her purse, head held high, at home. Alma was unaware of the vigil. She sat in her reading chair, flipping through a worn paperback she'd loved for years. A soft knock on the door startled her. She opened it to find her neighbor's teenage daughter, Jasmine, standing nervously with a folded piece of paper. "Hi, Ms. Alma. My mom said I could come by and give you something." Alma smiled gently and stepped aside. Jasmine handed her the note. "I had to write a speech for school," Jasmine said, "about someone I admire. I wrote it about you." Alma's hand paused over her heart. "Can I read it to you?" the girl asked. "Please." Jasmine unfolded the page and began in a quiet voice. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand. She didn't cry. She just didn't move. And by staying still, she reminded the world that black women have always carried grace, even when the world didn't give them space. Alma Greene is not just someone's mother. She's someone's legacy. Alma felt her eyes sting. "Thank you, Jasmine." The girl nodded, smiling shyly. "You made me proud to look like me." Later that evening, Elijah called. "Ma, are you up for a trip to D.C. next week?" She laughed. "Another plane. This one will feel different." "I'm listening. I've been invited to speak at the National Inclusion Summit, but they asked if you'd open the event." Alma's voice grew quiet. "Me? You? Not the story, not the footage, not the headline. You—" She hesitated. "I'm not a speaker. Elijah, you don't need to be. Just be yourself. That's all anyone needs to hear." There was a long pause. Then, "All right. Let's do it." The following week, Alma walked onto a stage for the first time in her life. The hall was full, lights overhead, microphones, cameras. She wore a deep green blouse and slacks that her church friends helped her pick out. She stood at the podium, paused, then spoke. "My name is Alma Greene. I'm a retired librarian, a mother, a widow, and until a few weeks ago, I thought I had already lived the most meaningful parts of my life." The room fell into perfect stillness. Then I boarded a plane, with a first-class ticket my son gave me, and I was asked without reason, without apology, to leave my seat. She looked out at the audience, and I didn't move, not because I wanted to cause trouble, but because I was tired of stepping aside for other people's comfort. She swallowed softly. "I'm not here to relive the moment. I'm here to ask you to remember yours. When were you last asked to shrink to wait? To be polite while someone else stepped ahead of you because the world had already made space for them? There were nods, some quiet tears. I was taught to endure, but we should not have to endure to be respected. Dignity is not a reward for good behavior. It is our birthright." She closed her notes. I stood so the next woman wouldn't have to. And now I ask you to stand not just in outrage, but in action. Wherever you work, wherever you sit, make room. Not because it's politically correct, but because it's human. The standing ovation was immediate. It wasn't polite. It was thunderous. Backstage, Elijah wrapped his arms around her. "You were powerful." She shook her head. "I was just honest." Later that night, after the summit, Alma and Elijah sat quietly in the hotel lounge. Neither said much. They didn't need to. The world outside had changed a little, and they had helped change it. As they sipped warm drinks, Alma asked, "You think they'll keep listening?" Elijah smiled. "They won't forget you, Ma. And now that you've shown them how to stand still with strength, I don't think they'll be able to look away." She chuckled softly. "Well, let's hope they save me a seat." The cabin lights had dimmed to a soft twilight as Flight 913 prepared to descend. Outside the window, The sky above Zurich was a canvas of pastel blues and pinks. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with quiet anticipation. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, checking seat belts and securing trays. The flight attendants moved down the aisle with professional calm, their faces composed, but their steps purposeful. In the first-class cabin, an empty seat, the one formerly occupied by Alma Greene, gazed back at everyone like a reminder. It was still pristine, the leather uncreased, the side panel intact. Sloane Fairchild sat in seat 3A a few rows behind, her expression unreadable. She watched the empty pod with a curious mixture of regret and relief. She had expected an apology or a refund or at least some personal acknowledgement from the crew. Instead, she found herself wondering whether the empty seat represented her own lost sense of entitlement. 2 rows ahead, Tara Wyndham adjusted her uniform for what she hoped would be the last time. Her palms were damp, and she forced herself to breathe slowly. Across the aisle, Darren Cho checked his tablet one last time, confirming that the procedural notes and emails were correct. Each message had a timestamp detailing the immediate suspension of the LyraCorp corporate account and the formal investigation into the Flight 913 incident. The severity of that administrative freeze still reverberated through his mind. At the front, near the galley, Captain Greg Marlowe leaned against the bulkhead. He watched the cabin through the small window in the cockpit door. The tension in the air was palpable. He exhaled deeply, running a hand through his hair. His headset lay on the counter beside him, a silent witness to the storm that had grown far beyond a single flight. He glanced at the thrumming engines and then back at his crew, offering them a small nod. They had done their duty under impossible circumstances, but he hoped this would be the end of it. In seat 1C of the private jet that was waiting for her at Teterboro, Alma Greene closed her eyes and listened to her son's voice giving her weather updates and arrival times. The plush cabin of the Gulfstream felt warm and reassuring in contrast to the metal and tension of commercial aviation. She inhaled slowly and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks: peace. The soft purr of the jet's engines was a lullaby after days of uproar. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jasmine, her neighbor's granddaughter, showing a photo of the candlelight vigil. Another message from a colleague at the library sent words of solidarity. A call from her church's minister offered prayers and a place to speak at Sunday service. Alma realized her life had shifted in ways she could not have imagined when she first boarded Flight 913. She pressed the flight attendant call button just once. A moment later, a very polished attendant appeared. "You're welcome to anything you need, Ms. Greene," she said. "We have tea fresh from the kettle and almond biscotti if you'd like." Alma smiled. "Chamomile tea, please." "Absolutely." The attendant bowed slightly and left. Alma closed her eyes again and thought about the months ahead. There would be interviews, speaking engagements, maybe even a book. But she also thought about the small joys she would return to her marigolds, her book club, the afternoon walks down her quiet street in Savannah. Moments later, the plane banked gently as it crossed the Atlantic. Elijah's voice came over the line again. "How are you feeling?" Peaceful. "Good. I'll see you soon. I love you. Ma, I love you more." "Sweetheart." She ended the call and placed her phone on the seat's little side table. She rested her hand over the photo of her late husband that she always carried in her wallet. She hadn't opened it in days. Now she did, tracing his smiling face with her fingertip. He would have been proud, she thought, not of the headlines, but of her heart. Not of the turbulence she caused, but of the way she rooted herself in dignity. Below, Flight 913 crossed over the Alps, and the first commercial jet descending behind them would soon land. The comparison struck her. One flight's journey had become a symbol of systemic bias and corporate accountability. The other would continue its route, delayed but now more mindful. Perhaps. She allowed herself a private smile. Back on Flight 913. Tara approached Darren and lowered her voice. All set for landing. He nodded. Yes. Fuel levels good. Cabin secured. Clear skies ahead. She exhaled, and after this he gave her a thoughtful look. There will be investigations, training, reassignments, probably some counseling for the crew. But people learn, and that seat will never again be empty without meaning. She managed a small smile. I hope so. Passengers sensed the shift. Overhead, the seatbelt signs blinked off. A hush fell. Many looked out their windows at the clouds glowing under the dawn. A few closed their eyes in quiet relief. A journey that began with tension was ending with reflection. Captain Marlowe's voice came through the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing at Zurich Airport momentarily. Thank you for your patience and for flying Celestia Airlines. On behalf of the entire crew, I wish you a peaceful visit to Switzerland. His tone was warm, genuine. There was no pretense. He knew redemption was in the future work, not this moment. But compassion in the present mattered too. In the rear of the cabin, Sloane Fairchild placed her phone flat on the seat and took a deep breath. She felt an urge to stand, to walk to that empty seat, to leave something there in remembrance. Maybe a small note of apology. But she didn't move. Instead, she sat with the memory of the confrontation and wondered how many times she had assumed her old privileges would carry her without cost. She realized that privilege without awareness was a false currency. She would need to rebuild her own sense of belonging from the ground up, not just buy it with a ticket. The plane's landing gear extended with a gentle rumble. Lights in the cabin brightened. A few passengers began to gather their belongings, but most remained seated, eyes still cast upward, as if they had found something more profound than comfort at 30,000 feet. They had found perspective. In the cockpit, Captain Marlowe guided the aircraft down onto the runway. The tires touched asphalt with a soft thud. Sheer quiet followed. Then, applause. Alma Greene had once been a silent presence on a plane. Now everyone on Flight 913 applauded her. They understood her stillness as a statement that reverberated with meaning. They clapped not for the movie star in the seat, but for the human resilience she represented. They celebrated her refusal to shrink, her claim to dignity. Tara Wyndham stood near the exit door as passengers filed out. She helped each guest with a genuine smile of welcome. Each thank you she received was met with sincerity. She held her head a little higher. She felt the weight of the lessons owed to her. She would carry them forward. When it was her turn, Sloane Fairchild paused in the aisle and closed her eyes for a moment. Then she approached Tara. "Me, Ms. Wyndham," she stammered. "I owe you an apology." Tara looked at her, surprised, then inclined her head. "I was wrong. About everything. Thank you for handling it with patience." Tara's lips quivered, but she managed a small nod and said, "Thank you for saying that." As Alma stepped into the sky bridge, she did not look back. She carried herself with quiet grace. The world had watched her, but she walked forward for herself. She had not needed vindication. She had needed recognition of her humanity. She had received it in ways she could never have imagined. At the bottom of the jet bridge, Elijah waited, arms wide. He wrapped her in a gentle embrace, and she let herself breathe for the first time in weeks. "Welcome to Zurich," he whispered. "You earned this." She pulled back and smiled at him, her eyes clear and unwavering. Yes, she thought, but more than that. I earned me. The spring air felt crisp as Alma Greene stepped onto the cobbled pathway of her local library's front lawn. Cherry blossoms fluttered down like pale pink snow. A small crowd gathered in folding chairs before a simple wooden podium. A banner overhead read Library Community Day, celebrating roots and resilience. At the center of today's program was Alma herself, returning home stronger than ever. Elijah stood off to the side, holding a bouquet of daisies, her favorite. He watched her approach the stage with that familiar calm strength. The same grace that had stopped an entire airline in its tracks now carried her forward before her neighbors and friends. No cameras, no corporate suits, just the town she had always known. A hush fell as she reached the podium. The librarian that introduced her spoke softly. Alma Greene has taught us that dignity isn't given, it's upheld. Please join me in welcoming our guest of honor. Alma adjusted the small microphone and scanned the faces, some young, some old, many whom she had seen at church or at the farmer's market. She smiled. Thank you all for being here. This library has been my refuge for decades. It's where I learned the power of stories. Stories can transport us. Stories can challenge us. Stories can change us. She paused, glancing at Elijah. My story began on an ordinary flight to Zurich. My son, Elijah, gifted me a first-class ticket to the book fair. But what happened next was anything but ordinary. I was asked to give up that seat, not because of an error, but because of an assumption about who I was and where I belonged. A murmur rippled through the crowd. They remembered the headlines, the viral video, the national reckoning, but now they heard it in her voice, quiet but unwavering. I didn't move, not because I needed vindication, but because I needed to remind myself and the world that my worth was not negotiable. I expected little, but the act of standing still demanded everything. It demanded respect. It demanded reflection, and it sparked something I never imagined. She looked at Elijah with gratitude. My son used his influence not for revenge, but to demand accountability and change. He knew that this wasn't just about me. It was about every person who had ever been asked to be smaller so someone else could feel bigger. Alma closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the petals of the cherry blossoms brushing her cheek. This library taught me that every seat at the table matters. Every voice has value. The stories we carry and recount can heal wounds and build bridges. My stand on that plane did more than secure a seat. It secured dignity for many. Elijah joined her on stage, gently touching her arm. Ma, you taught me that true power isn't in our titles. It's in our choices. You chose dignity over ease. You chose truth over comfort. And that choice has changed more than an airline. It's changed hearts. They both turned to face the audience as applause filled the air. It was warm, genuine, a celebration of community and conviction. Later, beneath the awning of the library's entrance, Jasmine Carter approached Alma with a small hand-bound journal. I wanted you to have this, Jasmine said, offering the journal. I collected stories from people in our town, moments when they chose dignity because of what you did. Alma opened the cover. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, drawings, and poems. My high school teacher never let me speak up. One page read, Now I do. My boss sees me differently after I told him when things felt unfair. Another, tears glistened in Alma's eyes. She looked at Elijah. Hearts changed. She whispered. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the oaks lining her street, Alma and Elijah sat on the porch swing. A single lamp cast a warm glow. "It's over, isn't it?" she asked. "Flight 913, the hearing, the media, the corporate reforms." He nodded. "In many ways. But in others, it's just the beginning. There are workshops, consultant visits, school programs, even policy proposals inspired by your stand." She chuckled softly. "I never set out to be a pioneer." He turned to her. "You did, because you showed us how simple it can be. You showed us that saying no to being small can make everything bigger." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I suppose every story needs an ending, but I'm glad this one isn't mine alone." He kissed her temple. "It'll live on in everyone who remembers your name and what you did." Later that night, Alma placed her journal next to the photo of her late husband on the bedside table. She took a final sip of chamomile tea. The gentle hush of the evening wrapped around her like a reassuring blanket. She closed her eyes and whispered into the dark, "May I always remember that standing still can move the world." And as sleep claimed her, she dreamed of marigolds in spring, a small airplane flying across a pastel sky, and the quiet echo of a seat claimed and a dignity upheld. Alma Greene's refusal to give up her seat was more than a personal victory. It was a beacon of hope for everyone who has ever been told they do not belong. Her story reminds us that dignity is not optional, it is our birthright. As we close this chapter, we honor her courage and condemn the quiet discrimination that tried to push her aside. Let her stand inspire you to speak up in your own life and build a world where respect knows no class, color, or age. If you felt her strength, please like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe for more stories that celebrate justice and humanity. We can change the world, one story at a time, and your next favorite tale is just around the corner. Stay tuned.